And I'm now going to turn to our next panelist today, Cesare Varallo. Cesare is a food lawyer at Food Law Latest, who has worked for a number of years on various food fraud investigations and food safety issues. Is perfectly placed to explain the perspective on dual food quality from the legal perspective. So just a little quick reminder to keep your questions coming in. We will have a Q&A session after Cesare speaks, but for now, let me pass the floor to you, Cesare.
Thank you, Natasha. It's my pleasure to be here today. Okay, I'll share my slides immediately. I work on dual quality issue from some time now, and today I want to just give you a glimpse of how is complex to define this concept from a legal perspective. Okay, I saw a question in the chat. It was, oh, but how is it so difficult to enforce dual quality issues at European level? Well, you get the answer now. And the first answer, and it's quite simple, is that we start from a concept quality that cannot be defined in food, basically. If you ask an engineer why Tesla has a certain quality, of why my computer has a certain quality, you'll get an answer that is very precise, okay? The machine answers to certain specifications and criteria, but food is an experiential product. Is different, okay? When you taste food, you appreciate the organoleptic characteristic, the smell, the texture, a lot of issues that you cannot appreciate in a car, in a phone, in a computer. So if you ask a food engineer what is quality, I doubt that you get a clear and straightforward answer, okay? And also for the consumers, quality is quite a vague concept, I guess, because sometimes quality is just perceived quality. You buy a product because you trust the brand, basically. You cannot be sure about the safety or the quality of the food, but you trust the company. Some other times because simply you don't like it, you don't like the other alternatives, and so you stick to your usual food for breakfast and you appreciate it, and that's it, because you like the taste no matter the price, no matter the label, you simply don't care. So it's very different, the discussion about quality in food compared to other products. And we don't have any definition of quality in the European food law, and I guess we will never have, because it's too complex. As a legal expert, I cannot find a way to completely define what is quality in food. Another problem is linked to the enforcement. I start my presentation from the famous message of the Commissioner Juncker that start all of this, you know, about the fact that we don't want to have markets, consumers that are discriminate with lower quality food. That was closed by the statement, quite constant in the Commission narrative about all the issues in the European system, that the national authorities are competent to curb those illegal practices. You have to remember that the Commission has no enforcement powers, has no inspection services. So the first challenge here is to coordinate all the competent authorities at national level that are honestly already struggling in applying in a uniform way also very old pieces of legislation like the hygiene package about food safety in our sector, okay? Because when you have to draft, you know, the HACCP plan in your company, you have to prevent all your food safety risk. Again, each situation is different. It's different if you do fish, meat, biscuits, or other kind of food. So there is not a legislation that tells you exactly what you have to do. So the space for interpretation is quite broad. And in a dual quality situation, this is the same. So this could bring to some countries that interpret the principles that we will see very strictly, others that will interpret those principles in a very more relaxed way. And this could also bring to a rigid position of the industry that is very frightened by this scattered application of EU law on the 27 member states. It's one of the most recurrent complaints from my client, but also at European level, you know, that we have a common market, but the common rules are not always applied in a coherent way. And the other problem is that the Commission itself states that the companies might have legitimate and objective reasons to distinguish the recipes, the composition from one country to another. So again, from a legal perspective, we have a very broad and open concept that might contain basically everything. Okay, so let's focus on those concepts. And then moving forward the discussion, we can see that the Commission, speaking of the New Deal, again, focused the attention on the problem, stating that the situation about dual quality shall be assessed case by case. This is an acceptance of the fact that we cannot give rigid criteria to define every single situation, so that a certain discretion has to be left to the national competent authorities. That, by the way, have also different instruments to punish the companies that put in place unfair practices on the market, okay? Because also the sanctions are not harmonized at EU level. So it will be also difficult on a long term for this matter, like for any other matters, to have a uniform enforcement. That's a big problem that we have in food fraud, so in fraudulent intentional practices, okay? In certain countries, those practices are not so strictly checked and are punished in a very light way compared to Italy, France, UK, other countries where you might have a criminal trial for food fraud very easily, okay? And if you look at the directive that modified the older, unfair commercial practice directive under the New Deal, you find again in the definition of the dual quality issue those legitimate and objective factors. So basically it's stated that the companies cannot market in one member state a food that is identical to the one sold in another member state, but with different composition or characteristics. So the definition is very strict. The food shall be identical or nearly identical with different composition or characteristic unless justified. And this unless justified is the problem, because if you want to charge a company, issue a fine, do enforcement, you need to prove a breach of the law, okay? So you need to build on this definition and to exclude as a competent authority that those legitimate and objective factors are not existing, okay? And which are those factors according to the Commission Q&A? They might be national legislation, because we might have national legislation imposing to you a specific composition for a certain food or food category, availability or seasonality of raw materials, or voluntary strategies to improve access to healthy and nutritious food. But those can be seen as elements that bring to a better quality of the food. So I'm not so much worried about the improved access to healthy and nutritious food, because if you also have policies, to let's say redistribute food to all people, usually you get sure that the food is safe and nutritious enough. But let's look, for instance, at the availability or seasonality of the raw materials. This is a new angle that I'm appreciating just now, because we are trying to put together a bid with some partners for a project of the DG Sante on labeling. And on some policy options that the Commission is evaluating today, I will not tell you if it's front of pack, origin labeling, whatever, the Commission is asking in this new impact assessment also the environmental impact of certain policy options. So sometimes if you use local raw materials, you might do a better product. You have a lower cost because, I don't know, I have facilities in Italy, in Poland, in Romania, in Netherlands. Okay, if I use ingredients from Poland, let's say 100%, instead of bringing from Italy, I might have a lower cost and maybe a better quality because I use fresh ingredients. So for certain fresh foods might be a plus. but for others might be a minus because maybe the local raw materials are not exactly the best one. And if I bring the best one from Italy, the price will increase, my environmental footprint will increase, so we have a lot of externalities as well. And when you are a company, you have to take into account all these externalities when you define the price. And the price is also a factor that has been a bit excluded by this discussion, because it's true that the taste also is a variable. If you drink, I don't know, Coca-Cola or Sprite in certain Arab countries, is so sweet that also if you are used to the sugar, you won't appreciate it, and vice versa. Probably if they drink our Coke or Sprite, you know, they won't be happy because they don't feel enough sugar. So we have also taken into account consumer taste, because sometimes companies are simply reformulating to accommodate the local taste. And that's a fact, not easy to demonstrate both for the company and for the competent authorities, but that's a fact. But we have also to take into account the price, because it's true that we don't want to discriminate consumers, but we have also to face the reality that the average income in certain countries, I say the Netherlands, probably is 4 times the average income of the people in Romania. So if we want to stay on the market with the exact same food, we have to find a compromise to produce this food locally or with different ingredients, ensuring, of course, that is nutritious and decent and safe for everybody. But maybe it's not so easy for all products to reach all the markets without any kind of reformulation. So those factors, in my opinion, as a legal expert, are very, very, very difficult to make 100% objective, to evaluate those factors in an objective way all the time. So the Commission, you have the link in the slides, give guidance to the authorities in the application already in 2017 on the application of the dual quality, of the criteria to evaluate the dual quality food, and clarified that basically, again, the National Consumers Authority are responsible for enforcing the law. But specified that the key question that has to be answered is, the consumer will purchase the product if he knew that there is a significant difference between the product that he bought 1 year before in another member state or not. This will be the key question. And that's the right way to interpret the problem, okay? Once you compare the product, the composition, the nutrition, you find the differences, you have an identical front of pack, the only way that you have to, try to give a judgment is this one. First, evaluating if the product can be considered of lower quality, because if otherwise, if it's of superior quality, we're speaking of nothing. And the other one, if to try to figure out if the consumer has been influenced by the label, by the brand, by the front of pack, and he really think that the product is the same. The guidance had also some interesting examples that I want to bring to you to open the floor then for discussion. I have another example later on. Some of those examples are very obvious, okay? If you have frozen fish fingers with less fish between different countries, but marketed as identical, that might be an issue of dual quality. But if you have an iced tea contains less sugar and artificial sweeteners instead of sugars in some countries, is good or bad? That's very questionable, because you have less sugar, so from a nutritional perspective, it's better, the product. You have artificial sweeteners that are approved under EU rules, are not maybe natural ingredients, not appreciated by many consumers, but still are allowed under the law, and we have to presume they are safe. So where's the lower quality here? I have no answer. It depends, okay? It really depends from your opinion and your perception of sweeteners or of beverages in general, okay? So consumer preferences, price elasticity, and all those factors has to be taken into account. But let me move forward to because those principles are already clarified, and I'm sure also by other speakers, to this slide, okay? To remember that the front of pack is very important, because the brand acts in the mind of the consumer as an insurance of safety and quality as well. So as stronger is the brand, as strong is the brand, as easy could be for the national competent authorities to try to demonstrate that the consumer choices are altered and you have a dual quality issue. They have, of course, to overcome all the objections that the companies might have under the legitimate reasons for which they formulate differently the products. So they have to address also the company's defense, because they won't stay still and get a fine. Most probably they will defend under the legitimate and objective reasons. But the company with a stronger brand will be more vulnerable, of course, to the enforcement. Here you have the decision tree that has been proposed by the national competent authorities, by the Commission in the guidance. But I won't stick so much on this decision tree, because it makes all the passage that we have already seen. Is the product compliance with the legislation? Yes. Is produced and promoted under the same packaging? Yes. So then it's indifferent in composition in different markets. Yes, okay. If we go down, we arrive at this point where we have a first suspicion that the product is might be subject to the dual food quality discipline. But at this point, once we define that the front of pack is identical or nearly identical and the composition is different, start the difficult part. You see that also the decision tree is not helping us so much, because it start to speak about concepts that are not so easy defined from a legal perspective. Is the consumer sufficiently informed about this difference? What does this mean? Okay, the ingredients list probably will be different, but shall I place, a signpost on my products if they are different from Germany to France to Poland, or what? Okay, if I comply with the rules as a company, I'll be fine, or it won't be enough. And then we have to decide if the transactional decision of the consumer has been altered by this presentation and this lack probably of warnings, because at the moment nobody's warning that the composition is different from one country to another on the pack. And if the answer also to this last question is yes, we have a potential breach of the EU CPD. So we have several problems. Enforcement is national, so different perception of the problem, different priorities, different sanctions, many general and not objective elements in all those definitions that you have seen. To charge companies in courts, you have to prove that you have a dual standard, and you have also to work under analytical methods that shall be accredited or at least generally accepted for sustain the case, because otherwise in courts it doesn't matter if it's civil or criminal, your testing might be challenged. So that's why it's so important, the next presentation from JRC, because JRC is the only one that moves in that direction to give a standardized method, at least generally accepted, is not, if not accredited, under accreditation bodies procedures, to test the products. And then the last issue, and I have still one slide that I want to show you to make you understand how difficult it is to define sometimes the dual quality problem, is that from JRC work that will be explained later on, we haven't found in the past very consistent patterns of discrimination. Okay, we have found products that might be possibly a dual quality issue, but we haven't found a consistent pattern from certain companies or in certain sectors that state clearly, okay, in, I don't know, Poland or Romania or Czech Republic, we have a clear and constant discrimination from a certain brand or a certain food category that is giving, lower quality food. So the cases that we have seen are very isolated. And taking a case study, just one from JRC, I want to show you where a case where also if the recipe is very different, might not be easy, like in the example of the iced tea, to decide if you have a dual quality issue or not. This is a cheese spread by the brand Almet. It's sold in several countries. You see Czech Republic, Germany, and blah, blah, blah. In Germany, that should be a favored country, you have a total amount of fat, for instance, and salt that is higher than in the other countries. Okay, if you look at the map, sorry, I'll go back to the other slide, and the pattern drafted by the JRC, you see that you have basically the same recipe in Czech Republic, Poland, and Slovak, and then different recipes in Germany and Lithuania. That will be justified by the company, by different sourcing of ingredients, different preference of consumers, and blah, blah, blah. But the strange thing is that from a nutritional perspective, the German recipe might look worse because you saw more fats, more salt. But if you look at the ingredients list, it looks better because they have just fresh cheese, herbs, onion, garlic, and salt. While in other countries, you have other kind of ingredients. You have the skim milk powder that might be perceived by the consumers as not exactly the same as milk as it is. Okay, you have some additives. Also, it's very neutral and not dangerous like citric acid, and flavorings and so on. So what's the better recipe here? What's the pattern? Who is discriminate? It's not always easy to define, and the companies have still a lot of space to challenge any decision of the competent authorities. So the effort should be to try to be as more objective as possible in future in defining the criteria for the national competent authorities, and try to do a step further. Otherwise, it will be very, very challenging task for the competent authority, I guess.
Thank you very much, Cesare. A fascinating presentation there. You know, made the issue very grey. Actually, you know, it's clearly very complicated. I'll just take a couple of questions from the audience before we move to our next speaker. So, we have a question on kind of your experience of any specific examples of issues you've worked on. You know, what happened and how they were resolved. And also, I'm wondering, in your experience, whether you are seeing kind of a decrease in the number of cases, maybe of dual quality. You know, I'm wondering how it's evolving kind of over the years from your perspective.
Well, I have the luck to work a bit in the east of Europe because it's where the problem is more sensitive. In my experience in Italy, for instance, we have not really discussed about the problem, because probably we have a high quality of the food, no enforcement, nobody is structuring to enforce anything. In the Eastern Europe, yes, there is, I would say that the attention has been increasing from 2015 on, reached a peak in 2017, 18, and now is steady. It's steady. The authorities are doing a lot of monitoring and giving warning to the companies, but I am not aware of any strong enforcement action for now. Okay, so I think that also the authorities feel that something is missing. They are not completely equipped to crack down on dual quality, because in Romania, but also in other Eastern countries where I work, the problem is really perceive. Okay, we have consumers that feel discriminated. We have consumer protection authorities that are very strong, very vocal against these practices, but no real enforcement for the moment, no strong enforcement.
Very interesting. Thank you. I think that's actually all we have time for the questions, but thank you again, Cesare, for your presentation.